Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight for part 2 of our story. Isn't it exciting? I love stories like this, and I'm so glad you've joined me to listen to it, because it's a fabulous story. And by all means, share the story with anybody who appreciates a very good story. So let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight. Sylvia would put down the phone with tears in her eyes. How she missed her lovely life in Philly, in her quaint, prepossessing hometown, where people cared about their neighbours. But there was no going back now. Sylvia had heard all about the recent unfortunate incident in the bar, and was convinced that Dusty was behind the disappearance of Wyatt Engelman. She had seen her husband arriving at the house on the day Wyatt had disappeared, looking particularly suspicious. But she had known better than to ask any questions or to dob her husband into the police, because she might find herself buried in a shallow grave, and she knew that she needed to preserve her safety by turning a blind eye to any suspicious behaviour on her husband's part. So it was on this unassuming Thursday morning in July that the couple had walked down the beach together, and to any casual observer they possibly looked like a happy young couple that was madly in love with each other and enjoying the pleasure of becoming new parents. But appearances can be very deceptive, as not everyone is privy to know what goes on behind closed doors. Sylvia had chosen to come to her favourite, rather special beach, that for some reason always appeared to be sequestered at the very best of times, possibly because the ocean currents in these parts had a predisposition to being rather fearsome. Not that many people were mad enough to swim out here, even if sporting a wetsuit, as the water was always obnoxiously cold. The couple spread out a picnic rug lackadaisically across the beach, and began to enjoy eating their turkey and cranberry sandwiches that Sylvia had brought along for their lunch, which she served with grapes, potato chips, and cob salad. It did not surprise her that several hopeful seagulls began hopping towards them eagerly, their beady eyes homing in on the sandwiches, eager to steal away a few crumbs. Sylvia did not have much of an appetite, so she threw most of her sandwich to the seagulls, who fought among themselves for it, one making Sylvia laugh with its sorry expression, when it realised all it had gained was a sorry-looking lettuce leaf. So Sylvia, feeling sympathetic towards its plight, threw it a sandwich, and it flew away, looking as if it had won the lottery. Dusty frowned, unable to see the humour in the situation. "Greedy birds," he tuttered under his breath, sounding very annoyed. "You can't even eat a sandwich around here in peace, without eyes watching you everywhere. You never eat much these days, Sylvia. When we first got together you were voluptuous and curvy all those years ago. You were never as thin as you are now. The seagulls have eaten more than you today, made a better showing than you have. You're as skinny as those catwalk models that look as if they haven't eaten a thing in centuries." "That's because they haven't," said Sylvia. "My mother knew this woman who was a model once. She said that the lady lived on 1 apple a day for years, and the girls were always throwing up in the toilets to stay as thin as possible. Most of them had bulimia. The designers want to have coat hangers for their clothes, you see, and they like the girls to have no breasts or booties because the clothes don't hang well on people who have too many curves. Their clothes look much better on skinny models, you see." "Well, what is the excuse then with you? You're not exactly an aspiring model, are you? Why don't you eat? No one is measuring your waist." Sylvia would have liked to have told him the truth, but she knew better than that. She had to protect herself. What she'd like to have said is, "I don't eat because it's difficult to have much of an appetite, when every day I live in abject fear, wondering when you're going to lash out at me again." Instead, she shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly and stared out at the ocean longingly and said, "I don't know. I guess I just don't have much of an appetite these days." Dusty frowned. "That's no excuse, Sylvia. You should eat. It's not good, nor is it healthy not to. Maybe you should get this investigated by a doctor. Maybe your thyroid is not working right." "There's nothing wrong with my thyroid, Dusty," she assured him. "Let's change the subject, shall we? We're here to enjoy ourselves, are we not? Are you going to eat the rest of your sandwich? Because if you're not going to eat it, that hungry seagull over there is watching your every mouthful you're eating and is hoping you'll pass him a few crusts." To Sylvia's surprise, Dusty laughed. His face lit up like a Christmas tree, and for a brief moment Sylvia saw the young man that she had fallen in love with all those years ago. He was still strikingly handsome, of that there was no doubt. But unfortunately, Sylvia knew beneath her husband's good looks was a man with a volatile, explosive personality that she did not trust an inch, and any love she once felt for this man had disappeared like the wistful smoke from a chimney. Dusty threw the rest of his sandwich towards the seagull, who dived on it with the nimble dexterity of a bird of prey, and flew away squawking with delight. The couple both laughed, and Dusty reached out to squeeze his wife's hands.
"If I didn't know better," said Dusty with a twinkle in the eye, "I'd say this having no appetite was an excuse to feed the seagulls. That's what this was all about, was it not? You love to feed the birds."
"You've got me," said Sylvia. "I confess I love feeding the gulls."
"Isn't this wonderful? The view is beautiful today, and the sunshine very pleasant,"
said Dusty, covering his feet with the sea sand and staring out at the ocean.
"We're going to have much fun when Howie's big enough to build sand castles in the sand. I can help him make large forts and moats, like I did when I was a boy myself. And we can go searching for shells together. And when he's older, I'd like to teach him how to hunt. There's no greater feeling than taking down a wild animal. Maybe one day when he's older we can go off to India and both kill a tiger together. Imagine, we could have some magnificent pictures to hang on the wall with us standing next to a dead tiger. We could even get the tiger's head treated by a taxidermist. We could hang it on the wall for show. Imagine that."
Sylvia looked disgusted. "I can accept you enjoy hunting, Dusty, because some animals in the wild need to be culled, and people need to eat. I get that, but I draw the line at you wanting to kill a tiger. I'm sorry, but that's disgusting. I think it's sick to want to take down an animal like that. I really do. Those creatures are magnificent, and you want to kill one just to show off to people? It's insane. Anyway, if my memory serves me right, I think they're a protected species in India."
Dusty shrugged. "I don't expect you to understand, Sylvia. It's a man thing. Look at you. You refuse to even kill a spider, so you're naturally adverse to any blood sports. But you were quite happy to eat the turkey on your sandwich, because it came from the supermarket. But you refused to acknowledge at one time it was a living, breathing thing."
"All right, I agree. You make a point," said Sylvia. "But even so, no baby of mine is ever going to India to kill a tiger, and that's final." Sylvia stared down at her sleeping baby, her eyes misting over with tears. "He's so beautiful, so perfect, isn't he?" she said. "Mrs. Nichols said I should enjoy Howie while I can. She said only the other day her son was 6 months old, and now she watched him walking down the aisle to marry his wife Susan. She says the time just melted away like butter, and now she's about to be a grandmother. I must admit right now it's hard for me to envisage that in 20 years' time Howie will be a fully grown man. He is so handsome, is he not?"
"He is, isn't he?" said Dusty proudly. "He's a chip off the old block. Reminds me of myself. He's got my eyes and my chin. When he's older, he's going to break so many female hearts."
"Like you did, you mean?" said Sylvia. "When you were at school, every girl had the hots for you," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm.
"I don't like the way you talk about that in the past tense, my love. I'll have you know women are still drooling all over me," he said, with a satisfactory smug tone to his voice. "I mean, can I help it that I'm so good-looking? When I was dating you, I got approached by a modelling agency, you know. They wanted me for a cover shot on one of their male magazines."
Sylvia mumbled under her breath, something about good looks not being everything. But if Dusty heard, he said nothing. Sylvia suspected her husband had cheated on her during their relationship, but she did not care. The more woman who titillated his fancy, the better as far as she was concerned, because it meant the less time she'd have to spend with Dusty herself, and the less chance she had of a fist being flung into her face. She had seen the evidence of Dusty's infidelity in the pockets of his shirts, blazers, and chinos, where bills had been paid for in expensive restaurants for 2 patrons, and she'd also discovered mysterious telephone numbers written on serviettes and lipstick. Her husband left these in his pockets deliberately. He went to great lengths not to hide his indiscretions, and Sylvia suspected that this was because he wanted her to know that other women found him irresistibly attractive, as if he was sending her a clandestine, silent message saying,
"You are very lucky, Sylvia, to have a man like me that every other woman wants."
"They can have you," Sylvia would mutter under her breath. "They are so welcome to have you, Dusty." How Sylvia had longed to run away from Dusty, but she knew if she did, he'd find her and very likely kill her. Dusty's insatiable ego and haughty, swaggering pride could not handle rejection of any kind. That would be too much for him to stomach. Ostensibly, after the recent events with the disappearance of Wyatt Engelman, Sylvia was more afraid than ever of her husband, and was convinced he was capable of murder.
"What are you doing, Sylvie?"
asked Dusty, sounding annoyed, as Sylvia threw off her dress so that it landed on the beach sand in a puddle of material. She began running across the beach, into the water, embracing the waves, wearing only a one-piece pink bathing suit.
"You can't go swimming like that," he called after her. "It's crazy. The water is freezing."
"It's good for you," said Sylvia, laughing coquettishly, behaving in a flirtatious way her husband had not seen in a long time. "They say ice-cold water is great for the health, you know. It's marvellous. It's so invigorating. I bet you're too chicken to come into the water, Dusty." That did it. No one told Dusty he was too chicken for anything, because his ego couldn't take being belittled or patronized. In that moment, needing no further encouragement, Dusty took off his clothes, scanning the beach carefully to see if anybody was watching them. He felt reasonably assured that nobody was around. 5 minutes in the water wouldn't be a problem, he thought. His son Howie was in his Moses basket, fast asleep. Grinning, he ran into the water after his wife. Today she was behaving like she did when they first dated all those years ago, and he liked this new look a lot. Unbeknown to Dusty Cladessa, there was somebody else watching the young couple, frolicking in the water together, and once the Moses basket was abandoned, that woman wasted no time to do what she intended to do. The woman was in her early 20s, and her dark black hair was tied back in a neat pigtail. She'd been waiting patiently for this moment, wondering if it would ever come, and then it did, as if manna had been falling from heaven. She surreptitiously crept to the beach, her heart pounding a dime to a dozen in her chest. She could see the young couple splashing around in the water, and time was of the absolute essence. Right now they seemed so caught up in a lingering kiss, and the man was grabbing the woman in the water as if he didn't want to let her go. The woman ran hurriedly with her bare feet towards the beach, her feet lifting up the warm sand. She could hear the crashing, thunderous sound of the ocean waves as they rolled like charging white horses to the shoreline. She wondered how anyone in their right mind could brave that hostile cold water. She would never attempt to go swimming in conditions like this. The woman with her generously large, oversized floppy hat and dark sunglasses crept up very cautiously to the Moses basket, very worried and afraid she'd be observed and seen. She peered into the basket. For a brief moment she was bedazzled by the sight of the beautiful sleeping baby lying underneath the blanket, and her heart surged with a great love for this tiny little bundle. "Don't you worry, my little one. I'm going to take great care of you. See if I don't." She picked up the Moses basket very gently in her hands and ambitiously scuttled away across the beach, her heart fluttering wildly like a frantic pigeon. She disappeared into the parking bay that overlooked the beach, climbing into her car and staring out towards the beach. The couple was still splashing around rather recklessly in the water, blindly oblivious to what had just transpired only moments before. "I've done it," she told herself proudly. "I've done it. Now I need to get the hell out of here. But I'm pretty sure no one saw me." The young woman turned on the key to the engine, pressed down the accelerator a little too forcefully, so that the car stuttered a little, but nevertheless she managed to drive away as fast as she could, so that only the truck belonging to the couple playing in the water remained in the parking bay. The young couple, seemingly blindly oblivious to what had transpired, came out of the water feeling frozen to the core. Every part of their bodies was tingling with the freezing water, but Dusty had to admit that he felt rather invigorated. The couple hurriedly ran towards their dry towels, and of course their clothes, and dressed as quickly as they could. They were shivering with the cold. It was a warm day, but that was the Oregon coast for you. No matter how hot the weather, the ocean remained resolutely cold, no matter the season. It was only then that Dusty's face paled and went as white as a ghost.
"Where is the Moses basket? Where is our baby?"
Sylvia looked to the empty spot on the beach, tears spilling down her cheeks. She cupped her mouth in astonishment, falling onto the beach, on her knees, crying out, "My baby! My baby! Somebody's taken my baby!" She looked at her husband in bewilderment. "Someone has taken Howie! He's gone! Do something! Do something, Dusty!" Dusty, in a panic, went running up and down the beach, calling out for his baby, which was an insane thing for him to do, given the baby could not run on its little legs or even talk. Dusty howled as he cried out. The pain in his voice sounded like that of an injured animal, as his worst fears were confirmed. His baby was gone and was nowhere to be found, and Dusty blamed the child's disappearance on his wife. Some things never did change.
"This is your fault, Sylvia. You were the one that got this crazy idea for us to go swimming in the freezing cold water of the ocean. And now, thanks to you, our baby has been abducted. I'll never forgive you for this," he had growled furiously at her. Dusty had been appalled by the sheriff's insouciance towards the abduction of his child. He'd have thought the police would have taken a graver view towards the disappearance of his baby, and done their utmost to find the whereabouts of his child. But instead the officers at the station lackadaisically took down his details, and said they would look into the matter. Should not his baby's disappearance be broadcast over the airwaves and be front-page news in the papers? But instead the police were about as useful as a bunch of lagerlouts on a beach vacation who fancied parking themselves on the beach all day and not moving a muscle. Dusty was not remotely happy about the sheriff's attitude, but then again the sheriff had never had any time for him, and had made no secret of it either. He wasn't going through the protocol of asking him the right questions about his missing baby, and had only taken down a handful of notes. "It's because the sheriff thinks I killed Wyatt Engelman," he thought to himself. "If it was anybody else's baby that had gone missing, he'd treat the case very differently. But because it's my baby, he couldn't give a damn."
The sheriff had nodded apologetically and said,
"I'm sorry, Mr. Cladessa. This must be a very difficult time for you. But we'll do our level best to try and locate your missing baby." "What's wrong with you, Sheriff?" Dusty had growled indignantly. "You were all over me like a hot rash when Wyatt disappeared, and were quick to blame me for his vanishing. But now my baby boy has gone missing, and you do nothing at all. And even the press only put a scant article in the back of the paper. Don't you care that my baby boy has gone missing?" "Of course we care, Mr. Cladessa. I assure you we're doing our best to locate your missing child. But I assure you when a baby is abducted and goes missing, it is not always easily recovered. You need to prepare yourself for that. We will do our job to the best of our ability. Of course we will. But you need to prepare for the very worst. You know what, Sheriff? You're bloody useless, the whole bunch of you are. I doubt you'd even find something if it was staring you in the face."
Dusty Claudessa left the police station in a very angry mood. He had a profound sense that something was seriously off. Even his wife's behaviour was strange. She was devastated that her baby was gone, and was perpetually crying, but she didn't seem to be making any effort to try and locate their baby. "The police are doing their very best, Dusty," she assured him. "They're doing all they can in the circumstances." But Dusty was convinced that he had seen the sheriff suppressing a triumphant smile, as if he was thoroughly enjoying Dusty's distress. He suspected Dusty was involved in Wyatt's disappearance, and was obviously looking on his baby's disappearance as some kind of karmic payback. No one was taking Dusty remotely seriously, and it was making him as mad as a caged tiger.
"What is wrong with people? Our child has been abducted," said Dusty to Sylvia. "You say the police are doing their best. Who are you kidding? They're doing nothing at all. They're all useless. Our story has not even been front-page news. We just get a tiny write-up in the back of the paper. It's pathetic. I've seen other kids going missing, and they've got much more airtime than we ever did."
Dusty lashed out at his wife several times after Howie was gone, but he couldn't help himself. His wife was beginning to irritate him as much as the good-for-nothing authorities had. Nothing made him more infuriated when he returned home one day from his job in town to find that Sylvia, his wife, had gone. She'd left a message for him. "I needed to get away for a few days. We'll be back soon. Don't worry about me. With the stuff that's been going on recently, I just needed some space, that's all. Please don't be mad. Love, Sylvia."
"Please don't be mad. Was his wife kidding?"
Dusty's blood was boiling over.
"How dare she walk out on him like this, especially at such a catastrophic time in his life, when the roof was folding in on them? How could his wife be so damn selfish? Did she really think she was alone in her grief about the enigmatic disappearance of their baby boy Howie? Wait until he got his hands on his wife. She'd regret the day she had chosen to walk out on him. If Sylvia was here right now, he'd love nothing better than to strangle her to death. She needed to pay for leaving him in the lurch like this, and the police had done nothing to help him locate his son. At this moment in time, he'd happily strangle the lot of them."
18 years later, Todd's account. After having gone through a divorce with my wife in Kansas, which is situated in the Midwestern part of the United States, with Topeka as its state capital and Wichita its largest city, I came from a small pretty town of Cottonwool Falls, with a small populace, situated among the rolling hills of Chase County. I moved down to the Oregon coast to get away from my connections to the past. My marital breakup had been a messy affair, and I figured moving down to the coast would be a clean break for me. There is nothing worse in this world than bumping into your ex wherever you go. And in a small town where everybody knows your business, it was bound to happen. I already knew our marital breakup had been the topic of great gossip by the town busybody, Frida Montesa, who was rapidly spreading around wild rumours that I was a good-for-nothing unfaithful spouse who'd been having dozens of affairs behind my wife's back, and nothing could have been further from the truth. And the worst part of it all is that people believed her claims, and these are people who'd known me all my life. I got quite a few nasty sideways glances from affronted people in town, one or two of them who said to me quite brazenly, "Shame on you, Todd." But I decided to walk away from their unkind insinuations, as what is the point of correcting anyone who's already made up their mind about you? In truth, at my age, in my early 60s, I didn't give a damn what other people thought of me. There was a time, as a young man, I'd have found such allegations wounding, but age has a way of smoothing down the rough edges in life and making you not take things too personally, which is the greatest gift of getting old. If the truth be told, it was my wife who had an affair with a personal trainer who was helping her to shed the last 20 pounds she'd been struggling to get rid of for years, which she blamed from all her pregnancies with our 3 children. The personal trainer was young enough to be my son, and that was something impossible to get my head around, and my children did not take the revelations kindly, as my son Chase had been at school with the young man in question, and was absolutely revolted that a friend in his own year had been having an affair with my wife. I think the young man fancied older women, and made no secret of this fact. I suspect my wife was still seeing him. My wife told me I was never around for her, never gave her enough attention. You know, the usual story. I tried to fix the problems in our marriage, but the damage had been done. And I found I couldn't feel quite the same way about my wife again. Her betrayal hit me hard. We tried counselling and everything, but nothing worked, as once the trust is eroded, there's not much you can do to salvage a dilapidated relationship that has been left in ruins. It's like trying to fix a cracked, broken pipe. Any plumber is going to say you need to throw away the old and begin again. I was trying to move on with my life, and to me the sensible course of action was to move away, about 27 hours by car, from the quaint rolling hills of my hometown to the Oregon coast, that had stolen my fancy from a young age. My children were now grown up and had left home, and they were living in what in its heyday was considered the wild frontier town of Dodge County, with a populace of about 28,000 people, which meant at the very least they were living in a town where not everybody knew their name or their business. I thought early retirement by the coast would be a good start for me, and I had always loved Oregon. I was to discover a beautiful old house that had been superbly renovated on the Oregon coast, that was a perfect size for me. It was not too big for a single divorcee embarking on a peaceful life. At one time the residence had been a large residential home, but it was now divided into 2 properties with 2 separate front doors. But regretfully the wall between both houses was paper thin, so it was easy to hear my next-door neighbour's television blaring away, as if I was living in an apartment block. In truth, it was a small price to pay to enjoy the prepossessing views over the Yachats coastline. It really was idyllic, and even the estate agent told me I had found a sought-after property that was one of a kind, especially for people wishing to live in a house that was not too large by the coast. I understood from the real estate agents that the house had been divided up by a marital couple who had got divorced but still wanted to be involved in their children's lives on a daily basis, so they subsequently divided the house into 2 separate residences so that they could live in close proximity to each other, but live separate lives at the same time, and be in a position to watch over their children. This fabulous house was nestled on a rocky outcrop that overlooked some rugged wild coastline and a plethora of lofty trees, along with a short ribbon of beach. The enchanting house was perfectly symmetrical, resembling a life-size children's doll's house, with blue shutters and a grey slate roof, along with generous-sized windows. It would seem the beach was not owned by the property, but by the state. The stretch of coastline was like a cul-de-sac, so no one trespassed on that beach, as many falsely assumed the beach with its surrounding woodland oasis was under private ownership, but they would have been wrong in their presumptions over that. I saw this lonely beach as being a great advantage to me, as who doesn't appreciate enjoying a beach all to yourself? My next-door neighbour, Dusty Cladessa, who lived behind a yellow front door, jointly shared this property with me, which included the front and back yard, along with some abandoned outbuildings that were only ever used for the storage of firewood and yard stuff like paints and gardening tools. Dusty Cladessa appeared terribly friendly and amenable towards me, and I thought on first impressions that I really liked this man, and boy did he have a story to tell. He promptly informed me that his child had been snatched from a beach as a baby of only 6 months of age, over 18 long years ago, and his wife Sylvia was overwrought with grief that she left him a note and never returned to her home again. He had tried desperately to search for her, with the help of a private detective, but she had left behind her no paper trail, and much like his 6-month baby, appeared to have vanished into thin air. I could not imagine what it must have been like to have lost a wife and a child, and in the grand scheme of things, It made my marital breakdown seem minuscule by contrast, and I felt desperately sorry for the man. I had not intended to spend my retirement on my own, but by the looks of things Dusty Cladessa had been alone for the last 18 years. So who was I to complain about my own misfortunes? I realized I had found a kindred spirit in Dusty Cladessa, someone who, much like myself, had been subjected to some of life's cruel blows, and subsequently spent a lot of time in his own company. He told me he had tried his utmost to find his missing boy, and was putting his hope in a DNA data bank, where he'd placed his DNA profile along with that of his estranged wife.
"I'm hoping," he told me, "that my son will enter his details, and when I get a match and find out who is responsible for abducting my child all those years ago, I will kill them. Whoever stole him from that beach."
I knew why he felt that way. I would surely feel a similar way if someone were to abduct one of my children. Dusty went on to tell me how the police had failed him in being able to locate his child. I reassured him that missing children and people were a global international problem, and that thousands of kids vanished every year from America. I was sure that the police had done their level best in the circumstances to try and locate his child. He didn't seem convinced.
"If I find that wife of mine, I'll kill her," he said. "She bogged off into the sunset, leaving me to deal with my own grief and melancholia. She told me she was coming back, but she never did. She lied through her teeth. She always was a cunning one. She knew what she was doing. But she's cleverly been living under the radar, so I can't find her anywhere. It's a bummer. It keeps me awake at night, you know. I've even punched holes in my wall. I've got so mad about the whole wretched business." "Well, I wouldn't be too hard on her if I were you," I said to him gingerly. "I remember reading somewhere, you know, that couples who've had a child abducted don't often stay together."
It was then that Dusty rolled up his sleeve to show me the tattoo he had of his wife inked on his arm, which I found a tad unsettling, especially with the unfortunate caption that suggested he owned his wife, like you might own a boat, a yacht, or a house. But I persuaded myself that he was young when he had the tattoo done, and had been so hopelessly in love with this lady called Sylvia, he hadn't really thought about things properly. I was to discover when he invited me to his home for a drink, and en route to the toilet I lost my way, and inadvertently stumbled into his office, to discover he had tons of pictures of his wife pinned all over the walls, which I did think was a tad obsessive. But given what the poor man had been through, I decided to make allowances for him. I mean, who was I to judge him? His life had been a roller coaster of misfortune, being flung from one disaster to another. I had made my own mistakes in life. If I had been a devoted, more diligent husband, and had not taken my wife for granted, maybe she'd not have strayed like a cat on the search for a better home. My wife had needed much more attention that I'd failed to give her. I could see time had not been kind to Dusty Cladessa. When I saw pictures of the man, when he was younger, in his prime, he looked like the type that would break many a woman's heart, as he had what I would say, in his photographs, a Brad Pitt kind of look about him, and I dare say he was even better looking than Brad Pitt in his day. Now, even though he was in his early 50s, I thought he looked older than I did. But grief and a hard life can take a grievous toll on the best of us. These days Dusty Cladessa had hair that was as white as a lily, and a road map of wrinkles all over a leathery skin that looked weathered and worn out by the sun. And he had a huge gut that extended over his pants, that I expected he'd gained drowning his sorrows by drinking way too much beer. I think he was beyond caring about his appearance any more, which I thought was rather sad, because if he had taken better care of himself physically, I was in no doubt he'd still be quite a handsome man. I think the two of us being in a similar boat, with not many friends around, it was natural for us to hang around together for the weekends. It was on a very enjoyable Saturday evening that we decided to hang out together on the beach by making a sumptuous fire pit where we could cook some hot dogs and knock back a few beers together. It was such a pleasure sitting on the beach, with the sand comfortably chafing against my feet, listening to the pleasant, crashing, rhythmic sound of the ocean, while enjoying the tranquilizing benefits of a pleasant night, with a silvery moon casting its ethereal shadows over the water, so the ocean shimmered and gleamed with a gossamer glaze. I was enjoying watching the flames from our fire pit spiritedly dance over the wood, and listen to the crackle and pop that the spitting fire made, as well as enjoying the smoking smell of the hot dogs, drenched in tomato sauce and mustard, that we were cooking. We tucked into them with gusto, very hungrily, and there is nothing better than eating al fresco, listening to the backdrop of the ocean waves crashing against the shore, and staring up at the velvety firmament, studded with rhinestone jewels. I think we were getting slightly inebriated on the beach together, when I got the profound sense that we were not alone. I looked towards the large cluster of trees, and I knew that something was in those trees watching us. And in truth it sent a shivering chill down my spine, as if someone had poured icy water down my shirt. I told Dusty, "I think we're being watched," and he hooted with laughter at that suggestion, as if he thought my preposterous comments were hilariously funny. "I'm being deadly serious. Don't laugh at me. Something is watching us in those trees over there, and I don't feel good about it. Whatever it is, it's huge." I know I'd seen a substantial shadow, and I was sure it was watching us. Dusty began to chuckle. "I think the only thing watching us around here, bro, are the crustaceans," he said, as we saw a few large crabs scuttling along the beach. "I wouldn't worry, bro. It's probably a trick of the light, that's all. I used to go coon hunting when I was a young man. It would be dark like this, you know. I was perpetually getting freaked out. Believe me, the mind can play some serious cruel tricks on you. Those dark, ambiguous shadows are like clouds in the sky, you know. You can see things that aren't actually there." So there we are. That is the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.